Good evening. My name is Silver Underworld, and welcome to my channel called Silver Slumbers. I'm going to help you get those soothing Z's that you deserve. If you are enjoying what you are hearing, down below in the description box, if you would like to buy me a coffee, it would be really appreciated, as it does help me in the channel out. I thank you in advance. In today's video, I'm going to read Creepy Backwoods Stories, Volume 1. So sit back, relax, and close those eyes, but be careful. Don't get lost in the dark. Growing up, playing video games and watching war movies, I didn't think twice about joining the Marines so I could be in the infantry. I went through all the training and unwelcome hardship that makes you really reconsider your decision. Anyway, I got stationed to a desert base known as 29 Palms, the largest piece of military-controlled land in the United States. It covers approximately 930 square miles in total. It's effing huge. In Southern California, a few hours from Mexico. When you're out that far, you start to see some stuff. Anyway, fast forward to my first field operation and me lose my mind. To put things in perspective as to how far away we are from civilization, the closest man-made object is about a 3-hour ride away. This day was particularly hot because it broke 130 degrees, as if the sun told. I told I could, so we spent all day hiding under camouflage netting, getting classes about various military tactics. Once the sun set, we set off into the night to get some hard, realistic training done. At night, we practiced using our night vision optic to do simple stuff like reloading and reading maps. It produces an image off of ambient infrared light, so you can actually see a lot more than the naked eye. The sky is absolutely cluttered with stars. I can see a shooting star every few seconds. The Milky Way. It's pretty darn cool. Finally, after roaming around aimlessly for what felt like forever, we head back, and we're granted a few hours of sleep. I lay down and start to drift off. I'm suddenly awoken up after what felt like 10 minutes. And I get up instantly. Get up. You're on watch. Damn. I get dressed and stand by my post dutifully, like I'm told at the checkpoint. I'm given a radio and told to only lift the barbed wire after it gets approved over the radio. It's maybe around 2 a.m. and everyone else in my company is dead asleep except for myself and an officer in the comm truck. All I could hear are the coyotes. I decide to start looking at the stars with my night vision. I could hear a coyote yelp off in the distance and think nothing of it. A few minutes later, another Marine comes over a small hill in front of me. Nothing crazy, probably taking a dump. He looks towards me, but his eyes don't really reflect light. Rationally, one of us is probably dehydrated, so I think nothing of it. He approaches me, and after a few seconds of staring at me, he simply says, "Can I come in?" His voice didn't sound right. No inflection or questioning tone. Weird. I asked him what his name was, and why was he out so far taking a dump. He tells me his name, Sergeant Wright, and he ignores my dump question. Same weird voice. Granted, I'm new to the unit, so I don't know anyone named Sergeant Wright, but I still had to verify it. I pull up my radio. Maine, this is Road Guard 1. There is a Sergeant Wright requesting entry. Over. Road 1, this is Maine. There is no Sergeant Wright in the company, and the closest unit is about 25 miles away. Make sure... Oh my god. Get back here right now. Don't let him or even look at him. Run. As the weird dude started to hear this, his face changed to severely angry, like he wanted to rip my throat out and drink my blood. By the time I got back, everyone is awake. All of the vehicle lights are turning on, and everyone is packing up. Scrambling into the trucks, we leave a lot of stuff behind like tents, water, and food, and drive the entire 3 hours back. I never got an explanation from anyone but my squad leader, who was a simple backwoods kind of guy, who bluntly said that whatever I saw wasn't asking to get through the gate. I never really understood what he meant by that, until I discovered this subsection. Part 2, Mountain Edition. After my most recent creepy experience with weird-looking people scaring the F out of me, we went somewhere much more terrifying. A remote little Marine Corps base called Bridgeport. It's a national forest just north of Yosemite. It was built to train Marines in the art of mountain warfare. There's a lot of mountains. It's cold, it's windy, and if you ever go there, you'll hate your life too. Anyway, when we first get there, we stay in these creepy concrete huts with bunks in them. There's a bathroom and some showers and, well, that's about it. You fight over the outlets to charge your electronics and there's not really any heat besides a bunch of Marines cramped into one area. The first few days are miserable. Your body had to adjust to the new altitude. The air has less oxygen, so physical work and exercise plays in slow motion. Oh, and you're constantly tired, so all you want to do is just sleep. There isn't much in terms of fresh food, and things can get pretty bleak if you have the wrong mindset. You wouldn't believe me if I told you that these were the better times. Eventually, we march up into the mountains, carrying out a ridiculously heavy packs, stuffed to the brim with warming layers, food, water, and nicotine. The first few days were easy. We will hike all day and stop to rest and learn a few things on survival and such. There are some snow on the lower parts and not a ton, thankfully. Around the fourth night, someone had the awesome idea of making us practice our nighttime navigation skills. I'm a pretty decent navigator myself, so I was up for the challenge. No big deal. They hand out the compasses, maps, and projectors, and set up an elaborate system of how to get to the finish line. It was staggered so people weren't walking up over each other. This is where things get interesting. I'm in the woods. It's dark and cold. I hate my life, so I'm stumbling through the trees and brush loud as hell without the care in the world. I just want to finish this dumb thing so I can get back to sleep. I get to my first point easily because there is some moonlight shining through the trees. The second one was placed in an effing river. I still remember how livid I was standing in the river, copying down the word donkey, etched into the ammo can on top of a rock in a freezing, cold river. Wet boots will drive a man insane. I stop to squeeze out the moisture from my socks, and I get this primal feel that I'm being watched. I stand completely still, and all I can hear is my heart beating. No wind, no wildlife, just me. My first thought is that a Marine trying to piggyback off my success. I put my soggy boots back on and do what everyone else would. I crest the next hill and stop so I could listen. Nothing. Maybe I'm just freaking the F out. Screw this. I keep walking. 10 minutes later, I get the same feeling. Any rookie stalker knows that you have to match a person's footsteps so that they can't hear you. So I start to randomly stop and change my steps. I don't hear any footsteps, but I do hear breathing. If it's a mountain lion or something crazy, I have no choice but to keep walking and hope that I can pull a dull Gerber knife out in time. About this time, I get to my third point and plot my final point. It's near a road, so I cut through east and literally book it up the road. I still feel like I'm being followed the entire time, but I felt safer because I could hear a low roar of a Humvee engine up the road. Looking back, I led whatever it was right to the rest of us. That was a dumb mistake. Nothing else happened that night. Everyone else gave up, and they used the roads to make it into a camp. Those who don't know make it back are told to walk towards the sound of a beeping horn. I finally get to sleep in the safety of numbers. We use the next day to remediate our nighttime land nav skills and refuel our bodies with food. Once the sun set, we march off into the mountains in a file. Unfortunately, since I carry a rocket launcher, my natural position is the back, but not the very last, so it's a positive. We spend the early night hiking. We are moving very fast and probably 20 meters space apart. At times, it was common to lose sight of each other. All of us were slowly getting exhausted. Suddenly, it just gets dark. Like, the ambient light is just so absorbed into the darkness. I get the same primal fear. Extreme silence? Yep. Damn. I kept walking without a word until I hear someone, probably the guy behind me, calling my name. I turn around and he looks at me like I'm an idiot. The heck? Keep going, dude. They're gonna lose us, he said. Okay, weird. Who called my name? I spin back around and try to see my way through the brush for the guy that was in front of me. I get a glimpse of him and discreetly yelled at him to slow down, but he didn't hear me. What the heck? About the same time, I hear from behind me. Dude, what the heck is... I heard a light rustle of leaves and some twigs, but that's it. I run back maybe 15 meters, which isn't far, but at night, it is. There's nothing but his pack on the ground and his rifle. I called out his name. Nothing. I reach for my radio. It's dead. I turn on both of my flashlights. Dead. I start yelling. I blow my whistle that they made me pack. Nothing. I don't know how long it took for them to realize that I was missing and how they backtracked their way back to me, but it felt like hours. I could feel like whatever is just out there waiting, it's effing toying with me. I told them everything, and they were convinced that the guy behind me got lost. They all spread out, looked for him for a few hours, but ultimately came up with nothing. Sometime the next morning, one of the hippie park volunteers found him 30 kilometers away across multiple mountains. He was bleeding from his ears and I didn't even know his name. Of course, he had extreme hypothermia and had a ton of bruises on him, but no severe bleeding. They end up getting him a helicopter to take him to the closest hospital. I'm a teenager and I've been in scouting / Boy Scouts for nearly my whole life. And I really enjoy exploring with my friends and being trusted more as I'm older now. A few years ago, me and two girls named Amy and Harriet were asked to head to the woods surrounding our campsite to find a long, straight stick suitable for carving into a point. Bear in mind that I was a lot younger back then. Harriet was older and Amy only 1 year older than myself. We had been walking in deliberately the same direction as to not get lost, and memorizing the surroundings as we went. In order to find our way back easily, about 15 minutes in, we couldn't find anything to take back, so we turned around to return to the campsite. That's the initial panic that sets in. The trees had almost unnaturally knitted themselves together in such a way that it seems like our path was non-existent in the first place. Like it just vanished. We looked around 360 degrees and now everything looks exactly the same. Trees we could have sworn were different from one and the other appeared as all were copies of the same tree. We kept walking in what we thought to be the correct direction while shouting out for help and eventually came to a concrete path, almost like a road but very thin, separating the forest, splitting in two. We didn't follow the road as it went in the wrong, air quote, direction to our campsite. On the other side of the path was more forest. However, nearby was an abandoned shack, like used for storage or whatever else. We had no idea anything like this was out here in the woods, so we just kept walking. We eventually came to a road that we didn't recognize. A woman wearing a pink and purple Regatta Outdoors coat walked past and we frantically asked her for the directions to our campsite. As by now, according to our watches and Harriet's phone, we've been walking for an hour and a half. She says she has never seen us before, but She said there's another campsite in that direction. We followed her advice and eventually came back to our campsite. We frantically apologized for being so long and that we couldn't find anything. The leader, Ian, could see all three of us were shaken up, and he stated confused that we'd been only gone for 25 minutes and that our free time was still going on. To this day, this baffles me that all three of us, as free time was about 40 minutes long, and our watches and phones said that we'd been gone for hours. The forest, we were lost. It felt crushing and claustrophobic, like we'd entered an area that the concept of time didn't apply to. I believe in the paranormal. However, this was so unlike anything that I've ever experienced before. It was literally like we'd been in a time vortex or something, and that hours in the forest were only minutes in the rest of the world. The feeling was very strange, and it stuck with me for the rest of the camp. Thank you so much for reading my story. It's a weird one, but it's true. This happened when I was growing up around 2004 and 2005, when I was about 13 years old. It took place in a rural area, a nice town in Texas. The town itself was really small back then and not much to look at. It's just one of those towns that really isn't on the way to anywhere important. My father knew someone who owned a deer lease that was about 1,000 acres down outside of the area and was complaining about a ton of hogs that was tearing up their land. Being open season on hogs in the south, my dad thought he would surprise me in the summer and take me down for a week to go hunting them. Not only did that help him with networking for his job, but also gave us some quality father-son time. I remember the drive down to Dallas was torture. It was about 7 hours in my dad's hard-top Jeep Wrangler. The car wasn't so comfy. I hated it. All I had to do was either stare out the window or try to beat Super Mario Land 2 on my Game Boy Pocket, something I never was able to accomplish in my youth. Anyway, the drive took almost the entire day, so we got there early in the morning. The owner of the land had told my dad that he hasn't had anyone lease it for a year yet, and the cabin and the property might be rough and dusty. I didn't really care. At this point in my life, I had been in scouts for a couple of years and spent a lot of my free time in the woods or fishing with friends. Needless to say, I was pretty comfortable roughing it. So, after unlocking the gate and driving to the cabin on the land that we settled in, the cabin was pretty rough. Dust and dirt everywhere. Flies, and I remember what looked like some raccoons that got into the cabin and crapped all over the floor. After cleaning up a bit and getting the sleeping bags out, then setting up the cots, so we decided to go to sleep. Something about that night was weird. I never was able to get comfortable enough to fall asleep for any restful amount. I couldn't put my finger on why, but I had that feeling of being watched. I was finally able to drift off for what felt like maybe an hour. When we woke up, it was early, about 7 a.m. We decided to scout around the land for tracks and signs of hogs and find a good place to set up a blind. It was the summer and horribly hot in the afternoon, so morning was the best time to be out about. After walking for an hour or so, we came across an area of trees, lightly dense, and luckily found some signs of hogs. Typical torn up ground, where they had been rooting, so we followed them into the trees. I was looking for some more signs when my dad stopped me with his arm. I remember looking up and seeing someone standing about 50 yards away. Some of their body was blocked by trees. This was private land, so they definitely weren't supposed to be there. We also had confirmation from the owner before we got the lease that nobody was there. Not to mention the gate was locked up first when we first arrived. The person was wearing some bright color red jacket. We slowly walked up towards them. My dad called out, like, "Hey, we're hunters. This is private land." The person doesn't move at all. Dead. Still. We were about 30 yards away and could see that he turned away from us and with his hands in his pocket. Weird thing was that the person was in his ski jacket and what looked like to be ski pants. Now, this is Texas in the summer, and it was about 98 degrees outside then. My dad called out again. No reaction. He told me to stay behind him and unsnapped the clip from his pistol holster. That's all we had at the time, since we were only scouting the area and the rifles were back in the cabin. We approached the person right side. Then my dad told me to stay put about 20 yards away. I stayed and crouched down, watched him circle around from the front of the man, and that while talking to him, asking if he was okay. He finally passed around to the front of the man, and my dad stood there straight up with a confused look on his face. I called out and said, "Hey, what's wrong?" And all he could say back saying, "It's a mannequin." I walked over to it while my dad stood there staring at it, and as I got closer, one thing stood out the most. The clothes that it was wearing were brand new. No dust, no sap, no bird droppings, or sign of being outside for more than a day at most. At that moment, I looked at my dad and could see him getting worried. Almost immediately after that, I felt that feeling again, like we're being watched. And I knew my dad felt it too. I wanted to start crying. I remember feeling suddenly so scared. My dad whispered, "We're leaving right now." He grabbed my hand and drew his pistol. He scanned the whole area, the whole way back, where we were trying to hold back panic tears. We got back as fast as we could. I was so terrified, so I felt like an eternity. But in reality, it was almost 45 minutes max. After returning, we packed up and beat feet. We drove back home that day, and we didn't talk much on the way back. I remember right away that after we left, my dad called his buddy, the owner of the land, and he said he was confused. He said that he would go back and check it out next week when he was in the area. He also said that he has never had an issue with people because his property was high fenced. My dad normally isn't a paranoid person, but me being young and the least possibly having someone there that we didn't know about, he decided to be cautious and just to get us out of there. After we got back home, we talked and my dad was able to sleep that night before as well. He had the same feeling but didn't want to wake me up because he thought I was sleeping too. Turns out that next week, he got a call from his buddy and checked the whole property and never found a trace of anyone. No mannequin or anything. This story still makes my hair stand on end. No idea what this was, but the paranoid man in me thinks that it was some kind of trap or something. Not the creepiest thing that happened to me in the woods, but definitely top 3. So whoever was out there, I'm glad we never met. This happened about 13 years ago, when I was a sophomore in college, attending a liberal arts school in Suffolk County, New York. Within the first month or two of freshman year, I had found myself in a very tight-knit group of fellow theater kids. 6 guys, including myself, and 1 girl, and they all love horror movies and ghost stories. I had found my crew. Freshman year was tough, but we all held up together. It made the whole experience more enjoyable for one another. At the beginning of sophomore year, we decided in October, as the Halloween season was ramping up, we would find a creepy wood spot in a nearby town some night and scare the crap out of ourselves. We did some research and found that there was this particularly isolated area about 30 minutes away, infamous for paranormal sightings. Perfect. The 7 of us split into 2 different cars and headed out into the night. Allow me to set the scene. You turn off a busy main road, flood the strip malls and restaurants and whatnot, and you are almost immediately greeted by complete darkness. Again, this area was very heavily wooded. It was essentially a large web of winding roads surrounded by trees. Very few streetlights and very few houses. Without a GPS or a good sense of direction, one can get easily lost in there. We all made sure to have a fully charged phones and flashlights just in case. The goal was to keep driving until we collectively decide to pull over and go exploring. So, per the directions, driving for 30 minutes or so into this dark network, picking directions at random, just getting intentionally lost. A car has made a turn and, to our surprise, there was this huge log in front of us. We had reached a dead end of some kind, with nothing but trees beyond it. We all got out to see exactly what this was. Stepped over the log and noticed two narrow trails heading in different directions. This seemed like a good time as any to grab our flashlights and do some amateur ghost hunting. We flipped a coin and set off the trail on the right. The trail was so narrow that we had to walk a single file to avoid getting whacked by branches. So, for whatever reason, I ended up in the back. I'm usually pretty rational and level-headed, but I have to say, the further we went in, the more I was overcome with the uneasy feeling. I kept hearing sounds deep in the woods, unable to shake the feeling that we were being watched, but I seemed to be the only one that heard these things. So I shrugged it off as my imagination, and in any case, the whole point of us being there was to get scared. Not to mention that the fact that we were 7 able-bodied college students. What would we come across that could take us down? We headed down this trail for about 20 minutes, and just when I thought it would never end, we came to a massive clearing, and I mean massive. It was a large open field of unkept grass, comparable in scopes of a golf course, but not nearly as well manicured. Trees surrounded the entire field, which was so large, we could not see the end of it from where we were standing. I was thrilled to get out of that narrow trail, but I don't think any of us were expecting to find this area so vast. One of us looked to the right and said, "Hey, check it out." We all turned, and there was an old, dilapidated house several hundred yards away. The house was completely dark, with no cars or signs of anyone actually living there. We walked over and shined our flashlights at it, and sure enough, the windows and doors were all boarded up. I managed to peer between the boards of one of the windows, and what I could see was an old white couch covered in plastic, with an otherwise empty room. Whoever used to live here, they were long gone, because there was no way in, and because we felt sufficiently creeped out by the house anyway, we decided to walk closer to the trail we had came in from, have a seat in the field, and figure out what we're going to do next. We walked towards the narrow trail, but before we could sit, my friend Mark stopped on what he was doing. His expression dropped, and he pointed. We all turned. On the very far side of the field, directly across from where we came in, we could see someone, tall, lanky, and pale, dancing among the trees. And by dancing, I meant he was skipping around and grabbing a tree and swinging around it, and then doing the same to another tree. Basically a dootsy-doo. The moon was so bright and the woods so dark, it actually took a second for us to really understand what we were looking at. Jay, the 6'4" skeptic of the group, wasn't seeing it. I leaned to him, pointing in that direction, and said, "Jay, look over where I'm pointing. Don't you see that?" He squinted for a bit, and the second he saw it, he gasped with everything he had, clutched my arm, and whispered, "What the heck is that?" What happened next sent shockwaves through all of us. Whoever this was, they stopped dancing. He looked in our direction and started charging towards us. Without even thinking, we freaked out and ran back to the trail. Yet again, Jay was the only one who didn't see what was happening. He shouted after us, "Guys, what is it? Where are you going?" After about 15 seconds of running like hell, I heard Jay scream, "Oh my God!" I looked back and saw his flashlight following the rest of us into the trail. Wow, the walk into the woods took us about 20 minutes. We made it back to our 2 cars, hopped in, and we peeled away in closer to 5 minutes. Once we were safe distance away, we pulled over, got out, and checked in with each other about what just happened. My heart was pounding, and I know everyone else was feeling the same way. Nearly 15 years later, we're all still friends, living in different states, keeping in touch through marriage, divorce, children, etc. But occasionally, out of the blue, one of us will send a group text to the other with something to the effect of, "The woods. That really happened, right?" It most certainly did. The experience is always in the back of my mind, and I'm pretty sure it always will be. Here's the thing that still resonates with me about that night. Whoever that was, they were dancing manically in the woods at 1 in the morning, and then ran directly towards a group of young adults, not fazed at all by the fact that they were severely outnumbered. Did he know that we were there from the second we parked? Was he the sound that I kept hearing when we walked down the trail? Whatever the case may be, when he came for us that night, you can be sure none of us want to stick around and see what he was truly capable of. I had a summer job when I was a 15-year-old girl that was about a few miles away from my house. I live in a rural woods area, and my parents never let me go in the woods by myself, but they worked days, and my job started at noon every day, so I had to walk to work. I chose to disobey them and walk through the woods to work because it cut about a mile off of my walk. So every day at the same time, I'd walk through the very much abandoned state forest down a deer path for a mile or so, until it intercepts a railroad track. Then I walk a couple more miles down the road. Then I walk a couple more miles down the railroad tracks into town to my job. Stupid, I know, I was 15. Taking this path always freaked me out, as I always felt like I was being watched, but it was shorter and less sunny and less hot, so I ignored my instincts, thinking my parents' influence was just making me paranoid. My parents would pick me up after my shift, unaware of my daily routine. This continued for weeks. One day, I'm walking about a mile from any houses, deep in the woods, and there are 2 naughty magazine pages that had been ripped out and placed in the trail that was facing me. They hadn't been there the day before. I was completely creeped out as they were clearly intentionally placed, and probably for me since very few people utilize this area. But I kept walking because if I turned around at this point, I'd had further to go to get out of the woods. Then there's this huge hill to climb to get back to my house, and no one would be there to help me anyway. This was a densely wooded area with brambles of dogwood and rolling hills, so I couldn't see very far in any direction. Suddenly, I can hear someone else walking close by. I stopped, and I would hear them for a split second, and then they would stop. They sounded like they had change in their pockets, so I knew it was an animal because of the echo. I could tell where they were coming from. Just to check and see if I wasn't crazy, I stepped once more and heard the same noise, which quickly stopped when I stopped. And that's when I knew I was being stalked. My heart was racing with fear. My vision went blurry, but my instincts told me to not speak and not to run, but just keep walking down the dense deer path further into the woods. My gut told me to not look behind me. I could sense that there was something right behind me on the deer path, but I didn't look back. Now, I'm a rather short, slightly chubby person, and looking at me, you probably assumed that I couldn't run really fast. So if you wanted to catch me deep in the woods, you might assume you had plenty of time to do so. And looking back, I think this is exactly what this creep was thinking. But back then, I ran cross country and track, and I could run for a 7-minute mile, and hills were my specialty. I always placed really well on hilly terrain. By no means I was a great runner, but certainly I was likely faster than whatever pedo creep was hanging out in the woods stalking a little girl. It's not like I was processing this thing the whole time. I just instinctually knew not to run yet. I kept walking, seemingly deeper into the woods because I knew the train track was up ahead, where there would be more space to run without tripping or getting caught in the tree branches. It was terrifying as I looked back, but something told me not to. While I walked, I felt like my entire body was shutting down. It's a feeling I'd never felt before or after that day. It was a feeling of being prey. Everything went blurry, and I could feel blood pulsing in my ears and my heart was pounding. I just kept walking like nothing was happening and did not turn around. But I could feel someone maybe 5 or 10 feet behind me at this point, following me for a good 1/8 of a mile. I didn't turn around. I didn't scream because I knew no one would hear me. As soon as I got near to the train tracks, which was an elevated along a man-made gravel mound, I ran. And then I ran along on 4s up the hill, grabbing onto weeds to pull myself up faster. Then I sprinted along the tracks as fast as my lungs and legs could carry me. I heard and saw branches snapping below me in the woods, and now I was out in the sun, and the woods were dark, so I could see what was behind me in those branches. I just kept sprinting. I never saw the person, but I knew their intentions were awful. I could never cut through the woods again, and I didn't mention what happened to my parents till I was 18 and had to move out of the house. I was too afraid of being grounded. This story happened in July. My husband and I decided to take our 2 kids camping 1 week since we can't do much else since the coronavirus. Plus, we love camping and never had taken them before. Our daughter is 2 and our son is 6. We went to our usual place where the campsites are about half a mile away from each other. Well, since it started to get dark, our kids started getting scared and wanted to leave, so we decided to take him to my dad's for the weekend. We went back to the campsite, around midnight. We decided it was time to go to bed. We lay down and fell asleep rather quickly, and around an hour or 2 later, I woke up and had to pee. I woke up my husband, and he got up and walked with me to the bathroom, which was about a half away between campsites. On our way back, we saw light coming from our campsite, which kind of worried us, making us think that our family was looking out for us. So we quickly walked back towards the campsite. But right before we got at the trees, my husband threw his arms out to stop me. What? My husband shushed me. I stayed quiet and looked back at the campsite and watched the light. And that's when I saw a glint of silver in their hand. A long knife was ducked down and hid behind some tree, and in some typical scary movie fashion, the guy heard us move and shine his light towards the direction of the woods. He started running towards the woods, and we took off running in the opposite direction. We could hear him running behind us, but we kept checking behind us to see the light was now gone. We eventually were able to circle around the road and crept slowly back to my husband's SUV. We got back in and drove as fast as we could, and then called the police. They had us taken back to the campsite, but we waited in the car while they checked the campsite and the surrounding area. Soon, we saw more police cars pull up, and the 2 original officers came up and asked us to walk to the tent with them. We did, and what we saw was shocking. The tent was slashed into pieces, so all of our stuff were everywhere. The police ended up evacuating all other campers and did a sweep to the entire area, but didn't find anything. A flashlight that was along the area that we ran on. That's all they got. We follow up with the police every month and there was no updates. I will post anything if anything new came up. If you made it this far, I want to thank you for tuning in and hope you enjoy these stories. If you are asleep, well, maybe you can hear me in your dream world and I'll let you enjoy the rain. Enjoy Slumberland.